Hello and welcome back to MTG Detroit. My name is Philip and I will be attempting my first Tier 1 deck tech this week with Blue-Black Teachings. Not only is it my first Tier 1 deck tech, it's probably one of the hardest decks in Pauper to do a deck tech on because there are just so many variations and so many card choices that people have been using in this deck that it's really hard to give you a full rundown on everything. So I'm going to be showing you the deck that I chose to run, and along with some extra cards that are very popular in each section. Let's start off with the draw engine of the deck. The version of the deck I chose to run runs 4 Cumulative Knowledge, which is a 2-mana draw spell at instant speed. Draw 1 card, then draw an additional card for each Cumulative Knowledge in your graveyard. Now, with Blue-Black Teachings being a deck that likes to push to the very late game, Accumulative Knowledge is a very efficient draw spell, allowing you to often draw 2, 3, and even 4 cards at instant speed. This allows you to leave your mana open for counter and removal as needed, and then drawing card essentially free at the end of your opponent's turn. My version of the deck also runs 4 Compulsive Research. This is a much slower spell at 3 mana cost, and it's also a sorcery, but it does allow you to draw 3 cards, then discard either 2 cards or a land. Now, in the late game, you'll usually very easily be able to discard a land that you don't need, keeping 3 useful cards in your hand, allowing you to stay very consistent and efficient in the late game. Now, the last card on my list is Mystical Teachings, the namesake of the deck. This is a 4-mana tutor at instant speed, allowing you to search your deck for any instant or card with flash in your deck. This allows you to respond to any situation and get the cards you need for that situation. Flashback on the card also allows you to go back and look for another Mystical Teachings, giving you essentially 2 more tutors off of your first tutor if you happen to have the mana open and the free time to do so. Okay, now let's take a look at some more draw options for the deck. Think Twice has been a common replacement recently for Accumulative Knowledge. Think Twice is a 2-mana instant speed draw card with a flashback of 3. Think Twice's flashback ability allows it to be a more consistent draw 2 cards for 1 card instant speed than Accumulative Knowledge, but Accumulative Knowledge can in the long run draw you far more cards. It's just a trade-off if you want more consistency or if you want to take the chance on getting more cards or more power out of your card. Deep Analysis has gotten a lot of play recently as a replacement for Compulsive Research. It is a 4-mana sorcery speed that allows target player to draw 2 cards with a flashback of 2 mana and pay 3 life. This allows it to be a more consistent draw 4 cards for a little bit more mana invested. Now let's look at more of the control aspect of the deck, starting with counter spells. Counterspell is an extremely powerful card in any format, let alone in Pauper, so it's not really a surprise to see that every Blue-Black Teaching deck runs 4 of this card. My deck also runs 2 Deprive, a 2-mana counterspell with the additional cost of returning a land to your hand. Now, most Blue-Black Teaching decks run this because the returning of a land to your hand is actually beneficial, as I'll explain later in the deck tech. We also run a 1 of Remove Soul in the deck, allowing us to tutor for it later in the game, leaving our counterspell and Deprive in the deck if all we need to do is counter a creature. Since the Blue-Black Teachings counter package is very common in most versions of the deck, instead of showing you more options, I figured I would show you why 2 of the most common counter spells in Pauper right now are actually not very good in a Blue-Black Teachings list. Both Daze and to a lesser extent Spell Pierce are very popular options for counter spells in your Delver based tempo decks right now, but unlike in those tempo based decks, Blue-Black Teachings is a pure control list, pushing every game to the late game. That makes both Daze and Spell Pierce, while very powerful in the early turns, completely dead draws in the late games, just not where Blue-Black Teachings want, so these are not cards you'll ever want to try in your Blue-Black Teachings list. Now let's move on to the removal package of the deck. Now, even though the removal package in Blue-Black Teachings is extremely varied, you'll almost always find a 4 Change Edict in every list, and that's because the 2 mana cost removal is just very efficient, and being that it's a deck that pushes every game to late game, the flashback actually becomes very relevant, unlike most Pauper decks. Once again, even though the removal package is extremely varied, you'll always find some number of both Doomblade and Disfigure in every Blue-Black Teachings list. Warped Agony, Freakus Cure, Echoing Decay, and Treasure Slip are all 1-ofs in the deck that I can tutor for with Mystic Teachings when I need for special effects, be it gaining 2 life, removal of multiple tokens, moving a large creature, or just remove something that maybe has regenerate, or just whatever happens to come up in the game that I may need a specific removal for. These are my one-ofs for Mystical Teachings. The removal package for Blue-Black Teachings can be extremely varied, so I thought I'd just go over a few of the more popular options that I'm not currently playing. First up, we have Innocent Blood, a 1-mana sorcery speed edict effect for both players, but since we don't play any creatures in the deck, it doesn't affect us, making it a very efficient 1-mana removal. I just don't personally like playing it because it's a sorcery speed, so I can't tutor for it. And the 1 mana, although allowing you to play it early in the game, also stops you from playing counters magic or keeping your land open for something else you may need it for early game. Also, if you're going to be playing a sorcery speed in the deck, you're going to want something more like Chainer's Edict that allows you to at least flash it back. You get more card advantage off of it. And I just don't think this is where I want to be for a sorcery spell in the deck. The next option I see a lot of is Ghastly Demise. This is tutorable. It is only 1 black mana, making it very efficient. I don't like having to have a certain number of cards in my graveyard with the amount of graveyard hate going on right now for my removal, though it is a very efficient one and a good option. The third option I'm seeing used a lot right now is Complete Disregard. It is a 3 mana instant spell. Exile target creature with power 3 or less. It's an extremely efficient card. It hits most of the things you do want to kill right now in Pauper, so it's a good option. Now we look at the control aspect of the deck. Let's look at the life gain package of the deck. An aspect of the deck I feel is extremely overlooked by most players. One of the weaker aspects of most full control decks is that they can be pelted early on by quick damage by either burn or creatures, and they continuously beat on and worn down over time. And with this life gain package, it just shuts down that option for those decks. If they can't get the win in early, they're just not going to be able to come back once you start getting these life gain options online. The first option we have is Crypt Incursion. It's a 3 mana. Exile all cards from target player's graveyard. You can get 3 life for each card you exile this way. This gives you a lot of life late game, and because it's an instant, you can actually tutor for this when needed and then cast it, getting you a ton of life, making it nearly impossible for most creature aggro decks to ever come back and win the game after this card. The 2 of Pristine Talisman in this deck not only give you more mana, but allow you to gain life every turn if you use the mana or not. Burton decks particularly have a hard time coming back once this card comes online early in the game. Then we come to Radiant Fountain. My deck is running 3. Most decks of Blue-Black Teachings run at least 2 to 4 copies of Radiant Fountain. Radiant Fountain can be balanced with Dimir Aqueduct and also with Deprive that we noticed earlier, to gain 2 life every time we play it over and over, eventually taking us out of burn range very early on and making it very hard for creature decks to keep getting that little bit of damage they need to finish the game in. Now here we have the win conditions of the deck, and I use that term very loosely because honestly most of the time your opponent is just going to end up conceding once they realize that they have no chance of coming back to the game. First we have Capsize. At 3 mana instant speed, return target permanent to its owner's hand with a buyback of 3. Late in the game, you can tutor for Capsize and just continuously buy it back, sometimes casting it 2 and even 3 times at the end of your opponent's turn, returning all of his lands, all of his cards in play, eventually making him just discard all of his lands and play 1 a turn, bounce that again, and just get a lock. Now this isn't actually a win condition, but your opponent can't do anything and they eventually do just give up. Next up we have Evankar's Justice, a 4 mana sorcery spell that deals 2 damage to each creature and each player, again with a buyback of 3. The damage to each player is the key part here, allowing you to deal 2 damage, buy it back, deal 2 damage, buy it back, and eventually kill your opponent, because with the life gain package you have in the deck, you should be able to gain more life than you're dealing eventually, and just slowly whittle your opponent down. And the last win count of the deck is Curse of the Bloody Tomb. For 3 mana, you enchant your opponent, and they must discard the top 2 cards of their library to the graveyard at the beginning of each of their upkeeps, essentially slowly milling them down, very, very slowly milling them down for eventual win con. And now onto the lands to round out the main board. The deck runs 4 basic swamps and 4 basic islands. 4 of Dismal Backwater gives you another land that when it comes into play will gain you a life that you can bounce with Dimir Aqueduct if you don't happen to have a Radiant Fountain in play. 2 of Dimir Guildgate allow for a little bit more mana fixing. Bajuku Bog once again is in here just for another option for graveyard hate, just to have it in there without taking up any of your removal or counter spots. Along with the Radiant Fountain and Dimir Aqueduct we covered earlier, this gives us a total of 24 land in the deck. Now let's move on to the sideboard of the deck. 2 of Dispel, 2 of Negate, and 2 of Duress are in the sideboard to remove much of the removal versus other control or other tempo decks that you just do not need the massive amount of removal for. Shrivel comes in versus Goblins, Elves, Tokens, or any other deck that tries to go wide with a lot of creatures that's much harder for single target removal to handle. The 4 of Choking Sands comes in versus Tron builds to obviously try to keep them off of getting Tron. Relic of Progenitus comes in versus Reanimator and Dredge, and is just a good catch-all for any other graveyard decks that you happen to run into. Well, that's all for this deck tech. Hopefully I didn't butcher it too bad. If you like the deck, I'll leave a link to the deck list on MTG Goldfish in the description below, so you'll have a copy of the deck list and also the prices in both online and paper. And as always, if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you around.